Welcome back. Kim Jong-un's number two, a former spy chief, Kim Yong-chol, will be landing this afternoon in New York in a couple of hours to meet tonight with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We think they're having dinner, in fact. The strongest signal yet that both sides want the Singapore summit to take place as scheduled on June 12th. But to get here, this man accused of terrorism and cyber attacks needed a waiver from U.S. sanctions. He may even be carrying a personal letter from Kim Jong-un to President Trump. NBC's Kristen Welker is at the White House. Ned Price, former CIA analyst, former National Security Council spokesperson, and NBC national security analyst, joins me on set. Ned, first to you. You know a lot about him as a former CIA analyst, as a former NSC member. This guy was someone you were targeting because of his past activities, including being responsible, we believe, for the cyber attack on Sony.
He is not a good guy. He was responsible for the 2014 cyber attack against Sony that destroyed their servers. He had a hand in the 2010 attack on a South Korean warship, the Chonan, that killed 46 South Korean sailors. And the U.S. Treasury Department has designated him for trafficking in conventional arms as well. So there are lots of reasons to see this as not as someone with dirty hands. But how the times have changed. Remember that when Ivanka Trump was at the closing ceremonies of the Olympics, she was seated in the same box as this general. General Kim didn't acknowledge each other. And now, just a couple months later, here he is arriving in New York, going to have dinner with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. This just, I think, underscores, Andrea, the erratic nature of this administration's foreign policy. We go from rushing to war to potentially rushing towards a summit. Which
arguably a lot of people now say is better than the alternative. Kristen Welker, at the White House, a lot of expectation. One of the things that Victor Cha said last night on Brian Williams' show at the 11th hour was that protocol would signify that he ought to be meeting the President of the United States, because Pompeo twice met with Kim Jong-un to make this parallel. No plans that we know of, though, because that would require the president going to New York or him getting another waiver to come to Washington, D.C.
Very important point, Andrea. There is no sense that he is going to be meeting with President Trump. Our only indication is that those meetings will be taking place in New York with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And the White House signaling that they are moving forward, preparing for this summit to take place. Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday telling reporters that, look, the North Koreans have been engaging ever since President Trump threatened to pull out of the summit and announced that he was in fact doing that. In terms of what we expect to come out of the meeting with Mike Pompeo, that's really going to deal with the substance, Andrea. We know that there's another team that is at the DMZ, and then a third team that is actually in Singapore working on the details, the logistics. What would all of that look like? And the substance is where this gets very tricky. Will North Korea agree to denuclearize? According to an NBC News report, Andrea, based on intelligence from 3 U.S. officials, an intelligence assessment shows that North Koreans have no plans to denuclearize anytime soon. And in fact, one of the concessions they may be looking at is opening up a Western-style burger joint in Pyongyang. So there are still some very steep hurdles before this summit can take place. But bottom line, all sides seem to want that to be the ultimate outcome here, Andrea.
And in fact, really the best experts we know, Sig Hecker at Stanford and his team, had a report just out this week which says, in fact, denuclearizing this expansive program, which has thousands and thousands of people working for it, underground, above ground, missiles, plutonium, uranium, would require 15 years minimum, to say nothing of the verification. Ned, this is far more complicated than opening a hamburger joint.
Well, it absolutely is. At the end of the day, we will know this is a good deal if we can answer 2 questions in the affirmative. Does Kim Jong-un still retain his nuclear arsenal? And does Kim Jong-un still retain his nuclear weapons? I'm sorry, if we can answer that he has given both up. At the end of the day, the North Koreans, however, want us to answer a different question. Would you like fries with that? Those 2 things are not going to get us to the same place. We have to decide whether the North Koreans are actually going to denuclearize. The North Koreans have to decide if they are actually going to make these concessions, or if, I think a lot of us fear, the Trump administration is going to settle for a very hollow agreement, a paper agreement that will not over the long run make us safer, that will not over the long run lead to complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, but will look good. Will look good for President Trump and something that he can then cater to his base.